After the grandmother cared for her grandson in a coma for over 4 years, he woke up and told the doctor something terrifying. Ethan ran around the yard with all the energy in the world, while his dad, Jacob, watched him smiling. With the ball at his feet, the boy shouted excitedly, "Dad, look how fast I am!" He kicked the ball forward and ran after it, laughing loudly. Jacob, also laughing, crossed his arms and replied, "You're going to be the fastest of all, Ethan. No one can catch you." Ethan stopped running for a second, out of breath, but still with a huge smile on his face. He looked at his dad, so proud. "One day I'll be just like you, Dad." Jacob came closer, ruffled his son's hair and said, "You'll be even better, son. I'm sure of that." Ethan laughed and went back to running, full of energy, while Jacob watched him, thinking about how healthy and happy his son was. But when Ethan was only 7 years old, the family's life changed completely. His dad, Jacob, had a car accident and didn't survive. It was a very hard time for everyone, but especially for little Ethan, who adored his dad and didn't quite understand what had happened. After the accident, the boy started complaining about very bad headaches. At first, Madison thought it was because of the sadness. After all, he was missing his dad a lot. One afternoon, Ethan put his hand on his head and groaned. "Mum, my head hurts. It hurts a lot." Madison knelt beside him, worried, and asked, "Does it hurt a lot, son? Where does it hurt?" Ethan pointed to his forehead, his eyes full of tears. "Here, Mum, it hurts so much." She gently stroked his head and tried to calm him down, thinking it might be something that would pass. "It will pass, my love. Rest a little, and then Mum will give you some medicine." At first, Madison thought Ethan's headaches were something that would go away. She thought it might just be the stress from losing his dad, or even a cold. Every night she gave him some medicine and tried to comfort him. "It's going to be okay, my love," she said softly, stroking his head. "You just need to rest and you'll get better soon." Ethan, lying in bed, shook his head, still squinting in pain. "But it hurts so much, Mum. It feels like it'll never stop," he murmured, almost in tears. Madison, not wanting to show her worry, tried to smile to calm her son. "It will pass, you'll see." But instead of getting better, Ethan's condition worsened. The pain grew stronger, and he started feeling weaker. One day, as he tried to get out of bed, he felt dizzy and almost fell. "Mom, I can't do it," he said weakly, trying to hold onto the wall. Madison, panicked, ran to catch him. "Ethan, what's wrong, son?" He looked at her with tears in his eyes. "My head. It hurts so much. It won't stop hurting." That's when Madison realized it wasn't something simple. Something was very wrong, and fear began to take over her. Worried about Ethan getting worse, Madison decided to take him to the doctor. At the hospital, she held his hand tightly as they waited to be seen. Ethan, pale and with his forehead creased in pain, could hardly speak. "It's going to be okay, my love," Madison whispered, trying to calm him, but her heart was full of fear. After some quick tests, the doctor came into the room and gave the first diagnosis. "It seems like it's just a bad migraine. We'll prescribe some painkillers, and he should feel better in a few days." Madison felt relieved for a moment, but deep down she was still uneasy. "Are you sure, doctor? He's been very weak and the pain just gets worse," she asked, holding back tears, trying to stay calm. The doctor looked at the papers and replied confidently, "Sometimes stress can cause stronger pain. We'll keep an eye on it, but it doesn't seem serious." Madison thanked him and took Ethan home, trying to believe everything would be fine. But even with the medicine, the pain didn't go away, and Ethan kept getting worse. She started to feel that something was wrong, that the diagnosis wasn't enough to explain what her son was going through. "Mom, it hurts so much," Ethan said softly in the middle of the night, his eyes full of tears. Madison hugged him tightly, her heart heavy, and decided she wouldn't give up until she found the right answer. Seeing that her son wasn't getting better, Madison decided to find a specialist. She knew she needed more answers. After a few days of waiting and many tests, the specialist doctor called Madison in to talk. She was sitting in the waiting room, with Ethan lying on her lap when the doctor appeared at the door. "Mrs. Madison, can we talk?" he asked, with a serious look. Madison left Ethan with a nurse and followed the doctor to another room. Her heart was racing. She already felt that something wasn't right. As she sat down, the doctor took a deep breath and calmly said, The diagnosis we had before was wrong. The tests show your son has meningitis and there's inflammation in his brain. Madison's eyes widened, not fully understanding. Meningitis? But what does that mean? Will he be okay? Her voice trembled, the worry growing with each word. The doctor continued, Meningitis is a serious condition. We're going to start treatment right away, but his condition is already advanced. We need to act fast. Madison felt the ground disappear beneath her. She thought of Ethan, so small, so fragile, and fear overwhelmed her. Will he get better, doctor? She asked, tears already running down her face. The doctor looked at her with empathy but was honest. We'll do everything we can, but it's a tough battle and he'll need a lot of strength. Madison left the room, dazed, trying to hold back her tears. She rushed to Ethan, who was lying on a bed, still weak. Mum, what did the doctor say? He asked in a soft voice. Madison, holding back her tears, stroked his face and replied, trying to be strong. It's going to be okay, my love. Mum is here with you, and we'll get through this together. Ethan started the treatment right after being diagnosed. He had to stay in the hospital, surrounded by machines and equipment that Madison barely understood. The doctors rushed around, doing everything they could to help the boy. Madison was always by his side, holding his hand, praying for him to get better. Mum, I'm tired, Ethan said, his voice weak every time he opened his eyes. She squeezed his hand, trying to give him strength. Rest, my love, rest. Mum is here with you. Everything will be fine. The days dragged on, and Ethan seemed weaker and weaker. Even with the medication and care, his body wasn't responding as the doctors had hoped. He began to have high fevers, and the headaches didn't go away. One night, Madison was sitting by his bed, holding his hand, when she noticed something was wrong. Ethan's body went completely still, and his breathing became weak. Panicking, she called for the doctors. Doctor, please, come quickly. The nurses and doctors rushed into the room, and Madison was pushed aside as they worked. She watched from a distance, her heart in her throat, not knowing what to do. After a few minutes, the doctor approached her with a serious expression. Mrs. Madison, your son has fallen into a coma. His body isn't responding anymore. We will continue to care for him, but now we have to wait and see how he reacts. Madison burst into tears, completely devastated. A coma? But he will wake up, won't he? He'll be okay. Her voice trembled, fear overwhelming her. The doctor carefully said, We can't make any promises right now, but we'll do everything we can. Madison returned to her son's side, feeling empty inside. She held Ethan's hand, now motionless. Mum is here, Ethan. Please, my love, come back to me, she whispered, tears streaming down her face. She knew that from that moment on, it would be a long wait, and her heart was shattered. Days turned into weeks and weeks into months. Ethan remained in a coma, lying in that hospital bed, with all the machines around him. Madison couldn't leave her son's side, but the reality was becoming harder to ignore. She spent hours looking at Ethan, hoping for a movement, any sign of improvement. But nothing happened. Eleanor, Madison's mother, was always by her side. She also suffered seeing her grandson like that, but tried to be strong. One afternoon, as they sat in the hospital corridor, Madison looked at her mother, tears in her eyes. Mum, what if he never wakes up? She asked, her voice breaking from so much crying. Eleanor took a deep breath, her eyes teary, but hugged her daughter and said gently, I don't know, dear. We have to keep believing. But I know it's hard. Madison nodded, feeling the weight of the words. She didn't want to give up, but the fear of losing Ethan forever was crushing her heart. I don't know what to do anymore, Mum. I've already lost Jacob. I don't think I can lose Ethan too. Madison buried her face in her hands, crying quietly. Eleanor held her daughter's hand and spoke in a calm but pained voice. I know you're tired, Madison, but we're in this together. We'll get through it one way or another. Both mother and daughter faced that painful reality together. Madison and Eleanor found a painful but necessary routine. The two took turns at the hospital, day and night, caring for Ethan. Madison stayed by her son's side as much as she could, holding his hand and talking to him, even though he didn't respond. When she was exhausted, Eleanor would arrive so her daughter could rest for a while. One night, while Eleanor was sitting by Ethan's side, she spoke softly, as if he could hear her. "You're strong, my dear, and we're here waiting for you. Grandma is here, and your mum too. When you're ready, we'll see you wake up." She stroked Ethan's hair, trying not to cry, but it was hard. Every time she looked at him, her heart ached more. In the corridor, Madison sat alone, staring at the floor, when Eleanor approached and placed a hand on her shoulder. "Go home and rest, Madison. I'll stay with him tonight." Madison looked at her mother, her eyes tired and red from crying. "I can't, Mum. What if he wakes up and I'm not here? What if—" Her voice broke, and she started crying again. Eleanor pulled her daughter into a hug, trying to be the strength Madison needed. "You need to rest. I know it's hard, but you have to take care of yourself too. If anything changes, I'll call you right away, I promise." Madison took a deep breath, still reluctant, but she knew her mother was right. She needed a moment away from the hospital, even if it was just for a few hours. "Okay, Mum, I'll go. But let me know if anything happens." Eleanor kissed her daughter's forehead and replied, "Don't worry, dear, go get some rest. We're both taking care of him, and he knows that." As time went on, the weight of everything happening started to seriously affect Madison's mental health. She had already lost Jacob, the husband she loved so much, and now her son, Ethan, was in a coma, with no guarantee he would wake up. The stress of living between the hospital and home, the sleepless nights, the constant worries, it was all building up inside her. One morning, while sitting by Ethan's side in the hospital, Madison felt her heart tighten in a way she had never felt before. It was like the air became heavy, and suddenly tears started to roll down her face uncontrollably. "I can't do this anymore, Ethan," she whispered, looking at her son, who remained motionless. "I don't know what to do." She covered her face with her hands, trying to hold back the sobs, but the pain was too strong. She felt so alone, even with her mother nearby. Everything seemed too much for her to bear. When Eleanor arrived to take over from her daughter, she found Madison sitting on the hospital room floor, her eyes lost. Worried, she knelt beside her daughter. "Madison, what's going on?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but full of concern. Madison looked up at her mother, her eyes swollen from crying. I can't do this anymore. I already lost Jacob, and now it feels like I'm losing Ethan too. I feel like I'm falling apart inside, Mum." Eleanor hugged her tightly, holding her as Madison cried on her shoulder. "You're not alone, sweetheart. I know it's hard, but you need to take care of yourself too. You can't carry all of this by yourself." Madison shook her head, tears continuing to fall. "But how, Mum? How do I keep going? It feels like everything is falling apart and I don't know how to move forward. I feel like I'm losing everything." Eleanor, with a calm voice, replied, "One step at a time, Madison. We'll get through this together. But you need to rest, take care of yourself, or you won't have the strength to keep going." Madison knew her mother was right, but the pain inside her was so great that it was hard to believe things could get better. She was emotionally drained, and it was affecting every part of her life. The weight of losing Jacob and Ethan's situation was slowly destroying her. 4.5 years passed, and Ethan was still in a coma. The hospital had become a second home for Madison. Each day felt like an endless repeat, always waiting for a miracle that never came. Time kept moving, but the emotional toll on Madison only grew worse. She still visited her son every day, sat by his bed, held his hand, but she was no longer the same person. The sleepless nights and the burden of seeing Ethan with no sign of improvement were draining what little strength she had left. She felt like her life was stuck, while the rest of the world moved on. The physical and emotional exhaustion were overwhelming, and she didn't know how to cope anymore. One afternoon, sitting by her son's side, Madison looked at him with eyes heavy with sadness. "Ethan, why won't you wake up?" she murmured, her voice filled with pain. "I miss you so much, my love." She felt a constant ache in her chest that never went away, as if each day without seeing her son open his eyes was another small part of her being lost. Eleanor, arriving to take her turn with her daughter, noticed the change. She saw that Madison, once so attentive to every detail, was now distant, almost disconnected. "Madison, are you okay?" Eleanor asked carefully. Madison didn't even look at her mother, just shook her head, her voice low and emotionless. "I don't know what okay is anymore, Mum. I'm so tired. It feels like I don't feel anything anymore." Eleanor pulled up a chair and sat next to her daughter, worried. "Sweetheart, you're pulling away. I can see it. You're here, but at the same time, you're not." Madison looked at her mother with empty eyes, the spark from before gone. "Maybe it's because I don't know what to expect anymore, Mum. I come here every day and nothing changes. It feels like I'm stuck, like I'm frozen in time." Eleanor placed her hand over Madison's. "You're tired, I know, but pulling away won't help. Ethan needs you, even like this, even in this way, and I'm here too. Always." Madison took a deep breath, trying to find some feeling inside herself, but all she could feel was more pain and emptiness. She didn't want to pull away, didn't want to stop feeling, but in the midst of all the suffering, it felt like her heart was shutting down to protect itself. "I don't know how to be strong anymore, Mum," she said, her voice weak. "I feel like I'm losing who I am." Eleanor, seeing the state her daughter was in, tried to support her as much as she could, but she knew Madison was at her limit. One night, as the two sat in the hospital corridor, Eleanor held Madison's hands and spoke with concern. "Madison, you need to take care of yourself. This pain is destroying you. I can see how tired you are, how much this is weighing on you." Madison, her eyes filled with tears, shook her head, feeling the desperation taking over again. "I don't know what to do anymore, Mum. I want to be strong, but 4.5 years, and nothing has changed. I'm tired of waiting, of feeling this pain every day." She covered her face with her hands, sobbing. "I don't even know who I am without him anymore." Eleanor hugged her, trying to offer some comfort. "We're going through this together, Madison, but you can't let yourself sink like this. I know it's hard, but you need to find strength for yourself, for Ethan." Madison cried on her mother's shoulder, feeling the unbearable weight of time, of waiting, and of uncertainty. The emotional toll was breaking her, and after all these years she didn't know if she had any strength left to keep going. Madison had reached the lowest point in her life. The weight of 4.5 years of suffering, seeing Ethan in a coma with no change, was crushing her completely. The grief from losing Jacob was still an open wound, and now the long silence from Ethan made her feel more alone each day. One night after returning from the hospital, Madison locked herself in her room. She looked around, and everything felt empty, lifeless. The photos of Ethan and Jacob scattered around the house were a constant reminder of what she had lost. Exhausted, she sat on the bed, and tears began to stream down her face. "I can't take it anymore," she whispered to herself, the despair overwhelming her. "I can't live like this." At that moment, everything seemed unbearable. The pain, the exhaustion, the feeling that nothing would ever get better. She thought about giving up. She felt like she had no strength left to carry on, that her life had lost its meaning. Eleanor noticed something was wrong when she didn't hear any sound coming from her daughter's room. Worried, she knocked on the door. "Madison, sweetheart, can I come in?" When there was no response, Eleanor slowly opened the door and found Madison sitting on the edge of the bed, her eyes vacant and her hands trembling. "What's going on, dear?" Eleanor asked, her voice soft but full of concern. Madison, her eyes swollen from crying, looked at her mother and whispered, "I can't do this anymore, Mum. I'm not strong like you. I can't keep going like this. Maybe it would be better if I—" Her voice trailed off, unable to finish the sentence, but Eleanor understood. She rushed to her daughter's side, kneeling in front of her and holding her hands. "Madison, please don't say that. I know you're hurting, but that's not the answer. You're not alone. We'll get through this, but you need to get help." Madison shook her head, tears streaming down her face. "But I don't know how to keep going, Mum. I've already lost Jacob. And now it feels like I'm losing Ethan too. Everything hurts. I can't live with this pain anymore." Eleanor, her heart aching, pulled her daughter into a tight embrace. "I don't have to carry this weight alone, sweetheart. I'm here. You don't have to be strong on your own. We'll get help so you can heal, so we can find a way forward. Ethan needs you, but you need to take care of yourself first. We can do this together." For the first time in a long while, Madison felt a small sense of relief, being truly heard and embraced. She knew she needed help and couldn't face it all alone anymore. After much insistence from her mother, she was admitted to a hospital to treat her mental health. At first, it was hard for her to accept that she couldn't handle everything by herself. Being in the hospital, this time as a patient, made her feel vulnerable. But she knew it was necessary. In the first few weeks, Madison could barely talk about how she felt. She spent her days in silence, trying to understand how she had reached this point. But little by little, with support from the doctors and her mother, she began to open up. The therapy sessions were tough, often bringing up the pain of losing Jacob and the deep sadness over Ethan's condition. "I feel guilty," Madison said in one of the sessions, her voice breaking, "like I failed my son, my husband, like I wasn't strong enough for them." The therapist looked at her calmly and replied, "You've been through a lot of pain, Madison. You lost your husband and in a way your son too because of the coma. It's natural to feel that weight. But you didn't fail. You did what you could, and now it's time to take care of yourself." Those words were hard to accept at first, but slowly Madison began to realize that she was only human, that she didn't have to carry everything on her own. She started writing about her feelings, something the therapist suggested as a way to let it all out. She wrote about Ethan, about Jacob, and about the longing for a normal life. Eleanor visited Madison whenever she could, bringing news of Ethan and trying to lift her daughter's spirits. "He's doing well, just as he always has been. You're doing the right thing by taking care of yourself, Madison," Eleanor said, holding her daughter's hand gently. Madison knew that emotional recovery would be a long journey, but each day she felt a small sense of progress. Sometimes she could even smile again, even if just for a moment. The overwhelming exhaustion began to give way to a faint hope. She was beginning to rediscover herself, remembering who she was before all the pain. The healing process wasn't fast, but Madison knew that, step by step, she was finding her way back to herself. While Madison was in the hospital, taking care of her health, Eleanor took over the responsibility of caring for Ethan at the hospital. She knew how much her daughter needed this time to heal, so she made it her task to be by her grandson's side every day, easing the burden Madison had carried for so long. Eleanor arrived at the hospital early in the morning, sat by Ethan's bedside and spent hours there, holding his hand and talking to him. Even without responses, she believed that somehow he could hear her. "Hi, my dear. Grandma's here again," she said softly. "Your mum is getting better, you know. She's taking care of herself and soon she'll be back here with you. We're both waiting for you, Ethan. When you're ready, we'll be here." Eleanor tried to keep the atmosphere light, even though inside she felt the pain of seeing her grandson like that. She read to him, brought his favorite toys, and sometimes even talked about the simple things in life, as if Ethan were awake, part of the conversation. "The sky is beautiful today. You used to love running around outside, didn't you? When you get better, we'll go play in the park, okay? I promise." The nurses and doctors knew Eleanor well. They saw her there every day without fail. They witnessed the love and dedication of a grandmother who did everything to ensure Ethan never felt alone, even in a coma. As time went on, Madison began to heal, and knowing that her mother was taking care of Ethan brought her a peace she hadn't felt in a long time. During one of her visits, Madison looked at Eleanor with gratitude. "Thank you, Mum, for taking care of Ethan while I can't. I don't know what I'd do without you." Eleanor smiled, placing her hand on her daughter's shoulder. "I'll always take care of you both, Madison. We're family, and that's what we do. When you're ready, he'll need you. But for now, I'm here, looking after him." Madison knew that with Eleanor by Ethan's side, he was in good hands. She could finally focus on her own healing, knowing that her son wasn't alone, that her mother was there, filling the void of her absence with all the love she could give. 2 years had passed since Madison began her treatment, and the routine at the hospital remained the same. Eleanor still cared for Ethan every day, always hoping that he would show some sign of improvement. Madison was also doing better, managing to cope a bit more with the situation. But it was still hard for her to visit the hospital without feeling the weight of everything that had happened. Then, on a day that seemed just like any other, something unexpected happened. Eleanor was sitting next to Ethan reading a book out loud, just as she did every day. Suddenly she noticed something different. For a moment she thought she saw Ethan's eyelids move. At first she thought she was imagining it, but then he did it again. Ethan's eyes moved slightly, as if he were trying to wake up. "Ethan," Eleanor said softly, leaning in closer. "My dear, are you there?" With her heart racing, she stayed silent, waiting. Then slowly, Ethan opened his eyes, even if only partially, blinking as if he was adjusting to the light. Eleanor placed her hand on his, unable to believe what she was seeing. "Ethan, can you hear me?" she asked, her voice trembling with emotion. He couldn't speak, but his eyes were open, still heavy, and she knew at that moment he was trying to come back. Eleanor quickly called for a nurse, who rushed in to see what was happening. The doctors were called, and soon they were all around the bed, checking Ethan's vital signs, carefully assessing everything. Eleanor was in tears, but this time they were tears of joy. "Madison! I need to call Madison," she said, her voice shaking. The nurse reassured her, saying the doctors needed to monitor Ethan first, but soon Madison would be able to see him. With trembling hands, Eleanor picked up the phone and called her daughter. "Madison," he opened his eyes. "Ethan is coming back." On the other end of the line, Madison was in shock. What do you mean, Mum? He's waking up." Her voice was filled with both disbelief and hope. Eleanor, still crying, smiled. "Yes, sweetheart. He's starting to wake up." Madison didn't know what to say. She just told her mother she was on her way and rushed to the hospital. After Ethan opened his eyes for the first time, he was moved to a specialized unit in the hospital, where doctors and nurses could closely monitor his recovery. Madison and Eleanor were always by his side, filled with hope. Although he still couldn't speak or move much, just the fact that he had opened his eyes was a huge step forward. Each day, Ethan began to show more signs that he was coming back. Small hand movements, slight blinks, and sometimes he would try to follow the sound of his mother's or grandmother's voice with his eyes. Madison couldn't hold back her tears each time she saw him change. "Ethan, you're doing so well, my love," she said with an emotional smile, holding his hand gently. "We're so proud of you." Eleanor, always by her daughter's side, watched her grandson with affection. "He's trying so hard. His body is starting to respond," she commented, trying to calm Madison, who was still nervous about what might happen next. The doctors noticed the progress too and began adjusting Ethan's treatments. They introduced new therapies to further stimulate his brain, hoping his body would start responding more quickly. One morning, while Madison was reading a story to Ethan, she saw something that made her stop immediately. His fingers, once still, moved slowly. She stopped reading, incredulous, and held his hand again. "Ethan, are you trying to move your hand?" Slowly, he closed his fingers around hers. It was a weak movement, but it was there. Madison's heart raced with joy. "Mum, he's holding my hand," she shouted to Eleanor, who rushed into the room. Eleanor, her eyes full of tears, looked at the scene with pure happiness. "He's coming back, Madison. Our Ethan is coming back." The following days brought more progress. Ethan began to move his head slightly, and at certain moments it seemed like he was trying to form words, even though he still couldn't speak. For Madison and Eleanor, each small step was a victory, a new hope that he was truly coming back to them. Although the road ahead was long and the recovery slow, the fact that Ethan was responding to the treatments brought a light into their lives that they hadn't felt in years. What once seemed impossible was now becoming reality step by step. Eleanor and Madison were having tea together. The mood was quiet, something common in recent years. Madison was anxious, thinking about Ethan and the improvements he had been showing. Suddenly, Eleanor sighed deeply, as if carrying a burden too heavy to bear. "Madison, I need to tell you something," she began, not looking directly at her daughter. Madison stopped stirring her tea and looked at her mother, sensing the seriousness in her voice. "What is it, Mum?" Eleanor took a deep breath before continuing. "I know I always told you to have hope, to not give up on Ethan, but sweetheart, there was a moment when I stopped believing." Her voice faltered a bit, and she looked down at her hands, nervous. "As the years went by and he didn't show any signs, I thought maybe he would never come back. I didn't want to tell you because you were already so broken, and I wanted to protect you." Madison was silent for a few seconds, absorbing what her mother had just confessed. "You gave up on him?" she asked quietly, with a mix of surprise and pain. Eleanor shook her head, her eyes now filled with tears. "I never wanted to give up, but it was stronger than me. Each day I went to the hospital and saw no change. It was like a part of me was preparing to accept that maybe he wouldn't wake up. But then something inside me said that even if I didn't have hope anymore, I had to keep going. I had to be there, even if I no longer believed." Madison wiped her eyes, feeling the weight of what her mother was saying. She knew it had been hard for everyone, but hearing this made her realize how much Eleanor had suffered too. "But you kept going, Mum. Even without believing, you were still there." Madison took a deep breath, trying to understand better. "That means a lot. I know it's hard to hold on to hope for so long." Eleanor finally looked at her daughter, tears streaming down her face. "I kept going because I knew you needed me to. And deep down I thought that if he woke up, he'd need both of us. I blame myself every day for thinking he wouldn't come back. But now that he's responding, I realize that in some way he knew we were there. I shouldn't have given up, Madison. I'm so sorry." Madison took her mother's hand and gently squeezed it. "You don't need to apologize, Mum. I lost hope many times too, I just didn't say it out loud. We've been through so much, and no one comes out of a situation like this unscathed. The important thing is that you never stopped being there for him." Eleanor smiled through her tears and hugged her daughter tightly. "Thank you, sweetheart. I couldn't have done this without you." The two stayed there, embracing, knowing that despite the moments of despair and doubt, their love for Ethan had always been stronger than any uncertainty. Even in the hardest times, Eleanor's presence by her grandson's side had made all the difference, and now, with Ethan showing signs of recovery, they knew it was never too late to believe again. It was a quiet afternoon at the hospital, and Madison sat beside Ethan, as she did every day. Eleanor was next to her, reading a magazine to pass the time. The room was silent except for the sound of the machines monitoring Ethan. Everything seemed the same as usual, with no big changes. Madison held her son's hand, her heart always torn between hope and fear. She started talking to Ethan as she did every day, even though he still couldn't respond. "You know, Ethan, it's a beautiful day outside. When you wake up, we'll go for a walk in the park, have a picnic, just like you always loved," Madison said softly, her voice full of love. "I'm waiting for you, my love. We're here, me and Grandma, like always." Suddenly, as she spoke, she heard a faint sound, like a small groan. Madison stopped talking and looked at Ethan, confused. "Mum, did you hear that?" she asked, looking at Eleanor. Eleanor lifted her head from the magazine, also trying to figure out what had happened. What? What was it?" Before Madison could answer, the sound came again, a murmur from Ethan. He was trying to make a sound. The two froze for a moment, their hearts racing. "Ethan," Madison said, her voice trembling, leaning closer to him. "Ethan, my love, can you hear us?" Ethan's eyes, which were still half closed, moved slowly. He made another effort, and this time the sound was clearer, an attempt to speak. It was weak, but it was there. Madison put her hand to her mouth, surprised and emotional. "Mum, he's trying to talk!" Madison exclaimed, hardly able to believe what was happening. Eleanor rushed to the other side of the bed, her eyes filled with tears. "Ethan, my dear, we're here. Talk to us," she said, her voice choked with emotion. Ethan opened his eyes a little more and made another sound, still weak, but clear enough for them to know he was really waking up. Madison couldn't hold back her tears. "My love, you're coming back to us," she said, her face wet with tears. We're here with you. We're here with..." Eleanor placed her hand on her chest, feeling an indescribable joy. "He's conscious, Madison. He's coming back." The two hugged each other, overwhelmed with emotion, as Ethan tried to move his lips again. Although no clear words came out yet, the simple fact of hearing him make any sound was a miracle to them. After so many years of waiting, of pain and uncertainty, Ethan was finally starting to come back to them. The hope that had felt so distant was now alive again, shining brightly in both their hearts. In the days following Ethan's awakening, Everyone at the hospital was amazed at the progress he was making. Each day brought a new improvement. He was able to open his eyes more easily, move his lips, and slowly the sounds he made were turning into words. Madison and Eleanor were always by his side, celebrating each small victory. Then, one day, while Madison was sitting next to Ethan holding his hand, something unexpected happened. Ethan, with his eyes open and more aware, looked directly at his mother. His lips moved and he finally managed to speak, but what came out of his mouth felt like a blow to Madison's heart. "Go. Away," he murmured, his voice weak but filled with emotion. Madison, surprised, leaned in closer, thinking she hadn't heard him right. "What, my love? What did you say?" Ethan, now with more strength, repeated, this time more clearly. "Go away," he said, pulling his hand away from hers. "Leave." Madison stepped back, completely shocked. Her hands trembled, and she looked at her son, not understanding what was happening. "Ethan, why are you saying this? It's me, Mum. I've been here the whole time," she said, her voice filled with pain. Ethan, with a tense face and tears beginning to form in his eyes, looked at her with anger. "I heard everything," he said, struggling but determined. "You blamed me for Dad's death. I heard you said if I hadn't been here, he'd be alive." Madison froze. Ethan's words were like knives cutting through her heart. She knew that, in her darkest moments of despair, she had said things she never should have, things said out of pain and grief. But she never imagined that Ethan could have heard them. "Ethan, no, my love, you're misunderstanding," she tried to explain, tears streaming down her face. "I was so lost. I never meant to blame you. I love you. I've always loved you." But Ethan turned his face away, still crying but firm in his rejection. "Go away. I don't want to see you anymore. Go away." Madison, devastated, took another step back. Her heart felt like it was breaking into 1,000 pieces. She looked at Eleanor, who was also shocked by Ethan's reaction but didn't know what to do. Madison felt that, in that moment, the pain of losing her son, even though he was physically there, was almost unbearable. I'll give you some time, my love. I love you, Ethan, more than you can imagine," Madison said, her voice breaking as she left the room in tears. Eleanor rushed to Ethan's side, trying to calm him, but also shocked by what had just happened. "Ethan, my dear, your mum loves you so much. She was just hurting so badly. She never wanted to hurt you." Ethan, still hurt, cried softly, saying nothing more. The long-awaited reunion had turned into a moment of pain, and Madison, devastated, didn't know how to fix what had been broken between them. After the painful conversation with Madison, the doctor in charge of Ethan went to check on him to assess his progress. He knew that Ethan's physical recovery was advancing, but something about the boy's behavior worried him. Ethan seemed more withdrawn, sad, and although he was improving physically, something was emotionally wrong. As he performed the routine checkup, the doctor gently tried to start a conversation. "Ethan, you're doing really well. Your body is responding to the treatment and soon you'll be able to go home. But I've noticed that you seem a bit sad. Is something bothering you?" Ethan remained silent for a moment, staring at the ceiling. The doctor waited patiently, not wanting to push him. Finally, Ethan took a deep breath and decided to speak. I heard everything," Ethan said quietly. The doctor moved closer, surprised. "Heard what, Ethan? While you were in the coma?" Ethan closed his eyes, trying to hold back the tears. "I was conscious, even though I couldn't move or talk. I heard my mum. I heard her saying horrible things." The doctor, now fully attentive, sat beside him, giving Ethan space to continue. "What did you hear?" he asked gently. Ethan swallowed hard, tears streaming down his face. "She said that, if I wasn't here, Dad would still be alive, that I was the reason he died. She blamed me, and I couldn't do anything, just lie there, listening." Ethan's voice trembled, filled with pain. "I know she was sad, but hearing that made me feel like she didn't want me anymore, like I wasn't important to her." The doctor stayed silent for a moment, processing what Ethan was saying. He understood that in moments of grief, people sometimes say things they don't truly mean, But the impact of those words on Ethan, who had been conscious but unable to respond, was devastating. "Ethan, what you heard was very hard, and I'm so sorry you had to go through that. But there's something you need to know," the doctor said gently. "Your mum was in a lot of pain. Sometimes when people are hurting deeply, they say things that aren't true. I know your mum loves you very much. She came here every day for years. If she didn't want you or love you, why would she have done that? And you were never responsible for what happened to your dad." Ethan looked at the doctor, still crying. "But why did she say it? If she loves me, why would she say those things?" The doctor sighed. "Because sometimes pain makes people lose control. It doesn't mean she truly believes that about you. She was lost in the grief of losing your dad, and she said things she now deeply regrets. She loves you, Ethan. She's desperate for you to forgive her." Ethan was silent again, the tears continuing to fall. What he had heard had left a deep wound, and even though he understood that his mum was hurting, he wasn't sure if he could overcome the feeling of rejection he had while trapped in the coma. I don't know if I can forget what I heard," Ethan whispered. The doctor gently placed his hand on Ethan's shoulder. "No one is asking you to forget, Ethan. But you can try to understand that everyone makes mistakes, especially when they're in pain. Your mum is hurting just as much as you are. You both need to help each other heal these wounds. She lost her husband and, in a way, her son too. Imagine how lost she felt. She even went through treatment for her mental health." Ethan thought about the doctor's words, knowing that as hard as it was, maybe he could find a way to deal with the pain he was feeling. But he knew it wouldn't be easy. When the doctor called Madison in to talk, she entered the room not knowing what to expect. She thought it would be just an update on Ethan's physical condition, but she quickly realized something more serious was happening. The doctor began speaking calmly. "Madison, we need to talk about something important. Ethan shared with me some things he heard while he was in the coma." Madison looked at him, confused and already crying. "He told me to stay away. He hates me, doctor. But it was my mistake. He only remembers the first day of the coma, but I didn't feel that way for long. It was a mistake, doctor." The doctor sighed and carefully explained. "Sometimes, even in a coma, people can have some level of awareness. They can hear and sense what's happening around them, but they can't respond. That's what happened with Ethan. He heard what you said, and unfortunately it deeply hurt him. Madison felt as if the ground had disappeared from beneath her feet. She brought her hands to her face, the tears streaming uncontrollably. "No, it can't be." Her voice trembled, barely able to breathe. "I never meant to say that. I was so lost. I was so broken." She began to sob, her chest tight with guilt. The doctor remained silent for a moment, allowing Madison to absorb the gravity of the situation. "Madison, I understand you were going through a lot of pain at the time, and I know you never wanted to hurt Ethan. But for him, hearing those words was devastating. Now, he feels like you blamed him for losing his dad." Madison, completely shattered, shook her head, tears falling even faster. "What have I done?" she whispered, her heart breaking. "How could I do this to my son?" She looked at the doctor, desperate. "I never wanted to blame him, never. I love him so much, more than anything. How can I fix this? How can I make him understand that I wasn't myself, that I never meant to say those things?" The doctor took a deep breath and tried to console Madison. "The way forward is through forgiveness, Madison. Ethan needs to understand that you were in a moment of extreme pain and that your words didn't reflect your true feelings. It will take time, but you can start by showing him how deeply you regret it. Talk to him, write to him, do whatever it takes to show him how much you love him." Madison, still crying, nodded slowly. "I'll do whatever it takes. I can't lose my son again. Not like this." After learning how much her words had hurt Ethan, Madison decided she needed to do something to show her remorse and try to heal the pain she had caused. She knew that simply speaking wouldn't be enough, so she started writing letters to her son. Every day, without fail, she sat at her desk and poured her heart onto the paper, telling him how much she loved him and how sorry she was for what she had said. In her first letter, With trembling hands and tear-filled eyes, Madison wrote, "Dear Ethan, I don't even know where to start, but you need to know how deeply sorry I am for everything you heard. Never, not for 1 second, did I mean to hurt you. I was lost in my grief, in the sadness of losing your dad, and I ended up saying things that should never have been said. You are the most precious thing in my life, and there is nothing I love more than you. Please forgive me. With all my love, Mum." She carefully folded the letter and placed it in a box next to Ethan's bed at the hospital. At first, he didn't look at the letters. He was hurt, confused, and unsure if he could forgive. But Madison didn't give up. Every day, she wrote a new letter. Some were long, some short, but all were written from the heart. She recalled happy moments from Ethan's childhood, talked about the love she had for him, and how she never meant to make him feel guilty. Each word was a sincere plea for forgiveness, an attempt to heal the wounds caused by her pain. In one letter she wrote, "Ethan, I remember when you used to run around the garden laughing and playing with Dad. Those were the happiest days of my life. And even after losing Dad, you were always my light. I know I said terrible things, things that hurt you deeply. But you need to understand that it was never about you. It was never your fault, my love. I was broken inside and said things I didn't even realize I was thinking. I love you more than anything. Mum." As the weeks went by, the letters piled up, and the box beside Ethan filled. One day, while Madison was out of the room, Ethan finally picked one up. He read his mum's words slowly, feeling the sincerity in every sentence. His heart was still hurt, but slowly something began to shift inside him. Madison kept writing, not knowing if he was reading the letters, but feeling that she had to keep going. It was the only way she could express how sorry she was, how much she loved her son, and how much she wanted him to know that despite everything they were still a family. She knew forgiveness would take time, but she was willing to wait. Every letter was a small attempt to rebuild the bridge that had been broken, and Madison held on to the hope that one day Ethan would open his heart to her again. After weeks of letters and many conversations with Eleanor, something began to change in Ethan's heart. He was still hurt, but the words in his mother's letters, so sincere and full of love, started to reach him. Eleanor also spoke to him every day, trying to help him understand how deeply Madison regretted everything. "Ethan, I know it's hard," Eleanor would say, holding her grandson's hand. "Your mum was in so much pain, but she loves you more than anything. Those things you heard, she never meant to say them. She's been suffering so much for hurting you." Ethan looked at his grandmother, trying to process everything. He knew his mum was sorry, but forgiving her felt like a huge mountain he wasn't sure he could climb. "I know, Grandma, but it still hurts. It hurts to think she said those things," he replied softly. Eleanor sighed and gently stroked his hair. "Eleanor, I know, my dear. Sometimes people say terrible things when they're hurt, but the love your mum has for you is bigger than all of that. She's trying to make things right. Forgiving doesn't mean forgetting what happened, but it can be the first step for both of you to heal together." Ethan thought about this for days. He read and reread his mother's letters, feeling the regret in every one. He knew she wasn't in that dark place anymore, that she was doing her best to make things right. Slowly, the heavy weight in his chest began to lift. Maybe, he thought, it was time to give her a chance. Finally, on a sunny afternoon, while Madison was sitting beside his bed writing another letter, Ethan looked at her and spoke for the first time about how he felt. "Mum," he began, his voice soft but steady. Madison stopped writing and looked at him, surprised. "Yes, my love," she answered, unsure of what he would say. Ethan took a deep breath, trying to find the right words. "I've read your letters, all of them. I know you're sorry, and I know you said those things because you were hurt. I'm still sad, but I forgive you." Madison froze for a moment, tears filling her eyes. She never thought she'd hear those words so soon, her heart filled with both relief and love at the same time. "You forgive me?" she asked, her voice trembling. Ethan nodded slowly. "Yes, Mum. I know you never meant to hurt me, and I don't want to hold on to this anger forever. I just want us to be okay again." Madison began to cry, but this time they were tears of relief. She leaned in and gently hugged her son for the first time since he had woken up. "Thank you, my love. Thank you for forgiving me. I love you so much, Ethan. You mean everything to me." she said, her voice choked with emotion as she held him with all the love she had. Ethan, still fragile, hugged his mum back, feeling the warmth and love that had always been there, even in the hardest times. Eleanor, who had been watching from afar, began to cry too. She knew how much this moment meant for both Madison and Ethan. After so many years of pain and hurt, there was now a real chance for healing. The relief was immediate. Madison felt as if a massive weight had been lifted off her shoulders, and Ethan, though still with wounds to heal, felt a lightness he hadn't felt in a long time. It was the beginning of a new chapter for both of them, and Eleanor knew that with love and patience, the family could rebuild itself stronger than before. Eleanor had been the foundation that kept the family standing throughout the entire ordeal. From the very beginning, she had stood by Ethan and Madison, offering her love and support without hesitation. Even in the hardest moments, when it seemed like hope was lost, she remained steady, being the pillar of strength they both needed. When Ethan began his physical rehabilitation, the road was full of challenges. He was weak, his muscles didn't respond like they used to, and the daily exercises were painful and exhausting. Many times he wanted to give up, but it was Eleanor's constant presence that motivated him to keep going. "Come on, my dear, you're doing such a great job," she'd say with an encouraging smile, holding his hand as he tried to stand with the help of the physiotherapists. "Just a little more. I know you can do it." Ethan looked at his grandmother, took a deep breath, and with effort, took another step, knowing she was right there beside him. "Grandma, it hurts so much," he'd say, his voice weak and his body tired. Eleanor gently squeezed his hand and replied, "I know, sweetheart, but every step brings you closer to getting better, and I'm right here with you for each one." With each small progress, Eleanor was there celebrating Ethan's victories, no matter how small. When he finally took his first steps on his own, she cried tears of joy, hugging him with all the love she had. "You're doing so well, Ethan. I always knew you could do it," she'd say, her heart full of pride. But it wasn't just Ethan who needed support. Madison was also going through her own emotional recovery. Even after Ethan's forgiveness, she still carried the weight of guilt and pain for everything that had happened. In moments when Madison felt like she was sinking again, Eleanor was there, offering her shoulder and comforting words. "Sweetheart, you've been through so much. Now it's time to forgive yourself too," Eleanor would say, sitting beside Madison, holding her hands lovingly. "Ethan has forgiven you, and that's the most important thing. You did the best you could, and now you have the chance to rebuild everything together." Madison, still full of conflicting emotions, leaned on her mother for strength. "I don't know what I'd do without you, Mum. Sometimes I feel so lost," Madison would say, tears streaming down her face. Eleanor would hug her tightly, full of love and patience. "You're not alone, dear. We'll get through this together. We've always been here for each other, and that's not going to change now." Eleanor's love was what kept the family together. Her unconditional support gave Ethan the strength to continue his physical recovery and gave Madison the space to heal emotionally. She was the bond that kept mother and son connected, helping them find their way back to love, forgiveness, and hope for better days. Ethan's recovery was a long and challenging process. Each small step forward was a victory, but it required a lot of effort. He had to relearn how to walk, how to move confidently, and little by little his strength returned. There were days when it felt impossible to keep going, but Madison and Eleanor's constant presence helped him push forward. One morning, as he tried to take a few steps with the help of the physiotherapists, Ethan looked at his mother and grandmother, who were watching with hopeful eyes. "I'm trying, but it's so hard," he said, breathing heavily as he struggled to stand. Madison approached and placed her hand on his shoulder. "I know, my love, but you're doing so well. Look how much you've already improved. Every day you're getting stronger," she said with an encouraging smile. Ethan looked at his mum, still tired, but managing to take another step. "I don't know what I'd do without you both," he murmured, his look showing just how much their support meant to him. Eleanor, her eyes filled with pride, replied, "We're here always for whatever you need, and we'll keep going until you're fully recovered." Time passed, and although the recovery was slow, with every step Ethan took, the family regained a little more of the hope they had thought was lost. Madison and Ethan began spending more time together, outside the hospital too. Even though things were still difficult, they started to reconnect, strengthening the bonds that had been shaken. On a peaceful afternoon, while walking through the park, Ethan held his mother's hand. He was stronger now, able to walk without help. Madison looked at him, feeling her heart lighter than it had been in a long time. "We're becoming like we were before, aren't we?" Ethan asked with a shy smile. Madison took a deep breath and smiled back, emotional. "Yes, my love, we are, and we'll be even better." They sat on a bench with Eleanor close behind, watching with affection. The grandmother knew that despite all the obstacles, their love had prevailed. "Grandma, thank you for never giving up on me," Ethan said, looking at Eleanor. She came closer and gently ran her hand through his hair. "My dear, there was never a moment when I gave up. I always knew you'd come back, and that we'd all be together again." As time passed, the family's life slowly returned to normal, in a new and stronger way. They had gone through many difficulties, but love and patience helped them overcome them. Ethan grew stronger each day, both physically and emotionally. Madison, on the other hand, felt that the heavy weight of guilt was finally lifting, and with Ethan's forgiveness, she was able to move forward, rebuilding her relationship with him. Together, Madison, Ethan, and Eleanor found new hope. Each day was a chance to start over, to appreciate the small moments, and to strengthen the bonds that kept their family together. Little by little, they rebuilt their lives, certain that love was the foundation of everything they needed to move forward together. Please leave your comment with your thoughts on the story, or what you learned. You might change someone's life with your words. Share it with that friend or family member who you think could learn an important lesson from it. At the end, I'll also leave a few more stories that I'm sure will change the way you see the world.